China and Russia issued a joint statement of mutual support on February 4th. But how deep is that relationship? And what can we expect from China as a result of Russia's war on Ukraine? Yoon Soon is at the East Asia program of the Stimson Center. Yoon, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Did China know that Russia would invade Ukraine? Were they given a heads up about it?
Well, that's a heatedly debated question as for whether China was informed. Based on the evidence that we can see, I think the chance of China being informed directly by Putin that Russia was going to invade Ukraine is extremely small. It is possible that Putin said something to the effect of, we have legitimate security concerns, and we have to take some actions to address those concerns. But I don't think China was expecting a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as the government officials, Chinese public intellectuals, as well as government scholars and experts have all indicated that they did not believe this was in the cards.
You know, the Biden administration officials tried to share intelligence with China, convince them that an attack was coming, and they had their own intelligence. Why didn't they believe it? Wasn't it obvious?
Yeah, well, that's a very intriguing question, that if the Chinese did not believe American intelligence, they could at least look at the imagery from their own satellites. And the troop movements by Russia along the Ukraine border have been more than conspicuous. But the question is, when China looked at the same imagery, how could they reach a completely different conclusion? I think there, the Chinese traditional military philosophy probably played the most important role, because for China, if you can coerce another country, you should not invade. If you can use force without war, basically use coercion to achieve Russia's original agenda, which is to deter the expansion of NATO, then there's no need for Russia to invade. So in that sense, I think Putin's decision surprised, or in other words, shocked a lot of the folks, even professionals in China as well.
Well, you know, now there has been a full-scale invasion. You're saying that China has been shocked. What has the initial reaction been? What can we expect from them?
Well, the initial reaction is, well, China has been trying to play its balancing diplomacy, because they're not going to come out and directly oppose Russia. Like you said, China and Russia just reached a joint statement at the beginning of February, and that statement committed them to mutual support, but not mutual defense. But the other question that the Chinese will think when they look at the situation in Ukraine is that, what is China's biggest national security threat? And in the context of the great power competition with the United States, the Chinese cannot help but feel that, well, no matter what, Russia is a very powerful and useful partner for China in this great power competition with the United States. So when things are put under the framework or through the lens of the China's relationship with the United States, the Chinese view of Russia just improves significantly. No matter what, Russia is still a helpful and useful partner for China. So that decision or that perception anchors the Chinese responses to the invasion in Ukraine, and that's why they refuse to come out with a much more neutral position in this case.
So will China support Russia economically to soften the effects of sanctions?
It depends on the definition of support. The Chinese will not consider their normal trade with Russia as support of Russia. They will consider that as normal trade. And they have not signed on, and I don't expect them to sign on to the Western sanctions unless there is a UN Security Council resolution. But then we know that Russia has veto power on the Security Council. So a sanction resolution is not going to pass at UN. So the Chinese will say that all the Western sanctions are going to be illegitimate because it does not have UN authorization. And at the same time, the Chinese also will stick to the position that it is NATO expansion that has pushed Russia into a corner and pushed Russia in this dangerous direction. So the Chinese will argue that while the West, especially NATO, is at least as equally responsible for the consequence today as Russia is. And in that sense, the Chinese will say, well, sanction is not the solution. When was the last time that sanction has worked on Iran or North Korea or China for that matter? So I don't think China will recalculate their decision on the sanctions until they become also the target of that sanction. which is why the secondary sanctions will be most effective in influencing China's calculus.
Finally, Yoon, do you think this emboldens Chinese aggression towards Taiwan, or is it the opposite?
So far, I think it is the opposite, because the Chinese had expected a swift and decisive military victory by the Russians in the Ukraine. But so far, that has not happened. And it has to give the Chinese pause when they look at Taiwan as for, well, maybe the local resistance is not as weak as we had expected, just like in the case of Ukraine. Another aspect of this is when China looks at the diplomatic isolation that Russia is suffering, basically becoming international pariah, and the broad coalition against the Russian aggression from not only developed countries, but also from developing countries, that really gives the China scare. That if China launches a similar invasion into Taiwan, China would be cut out from the international community as well. That is a worst case, well, not the worst case scenario, but definitely one of China's worst nightmares.
All right. Well, Yoon, I appreciate you being on the program. We'll continue to watch this as it unfolds.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.